Um, and speaking of which, I actually am going to talk a little bit about a really important distinction that I think we need to make in my commentary on this week's show. So the left has absolutely correctly been allergic to the hashtag resistance response to Trump, right? We've seen everything from, at its most insidious, a lot of people, and, culminating obviously in the nomination of Joe Biden, frankly, who have no appetite for any type of systems change, for looking at any of the core conditions that led to the rise of Trump or Trumpism. There is endless numbers of, frankly, bipartisan consensus in terms of protecting permanent interests in Washington, the national security state, the pharmaceutical industry, Wall Street, and so on. Now, of course, there's distinctions still generally. There's obviously going to be more members of the Democratic Party that will be more likely to regulate and respond to these industries. But overall, we have certainly seen a neoliberal governing consensus, and the consequences of that have led to Donald Trump, and we can't ever lose sight of that. And we also can't lose sight of the fact that as we always say, the endless melodrama about Trump's tweets, and even at times the correct analysis of this administration's viciousness, racism, cruelty, and frankly, just core Republican policies. Overall, as Noam Chomsky says, that the Republican Party, with its climate policies alone, is the greatest threat of any singular organization to the future of the planet. And I think in many respects, he's absolutely right. But we pushed back because we noticed, and some people were very clear about this, particularly with critiques of things like Russiagate, Matt Taibbi as an example, that by sort of some of the super hyped up melodramatic rhetoric, we were missing really important distinctions and sort of over dramatizing Trump in some respects. Now, that being said, it's very important to also not lose sight of where there are serious authoritarian tendencies in the Trump administration and in the Republican Party, and also not losing sight of the fact that even as we can talk about big structural corruption, there still is distinctions inside the governing process, and Trump is absolutely taking things to a new and very serious extreme. And we need to be very, very real about that and think about it when we think about, as an example, frankly, strategic voting. And everybody knows I am absolutely 100% an advocate of voting in a way as to get Donald Trump out of office. It's actually very necessary in my view. So let's talk about a couple of things that have happened just recently. There is a huge conflict right now, the Southern District of New York, Donald Trump and Bill Barr. And Bill Barr is really the key conduit here. Go back and look at his whole career, going back to Iran-Contra, his work with George H.W. Bush. This is an authoritarian political figure. This is someone with a profound, deep, and abiding contempt for any form of, I would argue, even really limited constitutional liberal democracy. There is a prosecutor named Jeffrey S. Berman who has been overseeing the Southern District of New York and has been involved in investigating multiple people around Donald Trump, including, of course, the Michael Cohen prosecution. And now reportedly he's looking into possible illegal activities, and I mean, possible, I would say highly likely, of Rudy Giuliani and Rudy Giuliani's efforts to root around Ukraine for political dirt on Joe Biden. And actually, I'm sorry, we should start with number 2 first. Actually, I'll just read from this. And then we'll put up number 1 in a second. But let me just read this quote first. This is from the New York Times. Mr. Barr abruptly announced the resignation late Friday night of the prosecutor Jeffrey S. Berman, United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, whose office has been at the forefront of corruption inquiries into Mr. Trump's inner circle. The office successfully prosecuted the president's former personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, who went to prison, and has been investigating Mr. Trump's current personal lawyer, Rudolph W. Giuliani. But Mr. Berman then quickly issued a statement denying that he was leaving. I have not resigned and I have no intention of resignation, Mr. Berman said, adding that he had learned he was, quote unquote, stepping down from a Justice Department news release. Let's put that tweet up of Berman's full statement in a tweet here from the Southern District. He writes, I learned from a press release from the Attorney General last night that I was stepping down as United States Attorney. I have not resigned. I have no intention of resigning. My position, to which I was appointed by the judges of the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York. I will step down when a presidentially appointed nominee is confirmed by the Senate. Until then, our investigations will move forward without delay or interruption. I cherish every day I work with the men and women of this office to pursue justice without fear or favor, and intend to ensure that this office's important cases continue unimpeded. This comes on the heels of mega scumbag John Bolton, who Anna will be talking about in a moment, revealing in his book, including, among other things, Donald Trump endorsing the detention and systemic abuse of the Uyghur population in China, that he also was willing to lean on the Southern District to intervene and stop an investigation involving a Turkish bank in a conversation with Turkey's leader, Tayyip Erdogan. And so this process, which again, as the Attorney General's, as the Southern District head says, he was confirmed by a set of judges, not appointed by the president. There hasn't been a proper process to fill his office, and he learned he was being let go of or pretending he was resigning in a press release. Now, this is very hard to connect with ongoing criminal investigations with Trump and with Trump associates. Then, of course, we go back to the firing of the inspector generals. And yes, obviously, it was very easy for this to sort of get absorbed into other conversations about impeachment, which was not politically successful and so on. But the reality is that inspector generals are supposed to serve an independent oversight function to oversee corruption and fraud and abuse in the federal government. And clearly, Trump is getting rid of them as political retribution. Now, it's his right to do so, but we need to be clear about why he's doing it. I also want to take us back to, and I'm not sure the state of this, but a terrifying move at the beginning, even before the Democratic uprisings against police violence and the Black Lives Matter movement and the food riots as well, and of the last several weeks. Bill Barr's attempt to hold people in indefinite detention. I'm going to quote now from a piece in The Hill. Barr's power play for essentially open-ended suspension of criminal proceedings and related matters has nothing to do with stopping the spread of COVID-19. Barr's proposals, at least as far as we know from public reporting thus far, involve giving judges the power to suspend court proceedings whenever the district court is fully or partially closed by virtue of any natural disaster, civil disobedience, or any other emergency situation. The only reason to suspend court proceedings would be if no judge or court orders or other personnel were available to deal with these cases. That's not the case. And now it is highly unlikely to ever be the case. This was a piece from a fellow at the Cato Institute written at the time that Barr was proposing. That's Patrick Eddington from the Cato Institute. In the last several weeks, of course, with the protests, we saw Donald Trump order the gassing of nonviolent protesters, the tear gassing of them, so he could have a photo op. Advocacy of martial law moves by Senator Tom Cotton, and other ongoing threats from the White House and the Attorney General. So even as we can absolutely and also even understand contextually that the overall erosion of civil liberties in our time has been a bipartisan project, going back to as one of many examples, Bill Clinton signing the Effectiveness and Death Penalty Act in the 1990s, and the bipartisan consensus on the absolutely dangerous Patriot Act that has damaged our civil liberties and privacy so fundamentally. That being said, it is very clear that between Trump and Barr, there is a expansive view of the power of the unitary executive, which is going to be used by absolutely a uniquely corrupt and grotesque and capricious head of state. People should be real about it and factor it in when they think about this election.
Yeah, I love the last point especially because, for Democrats under a Democratic administration, when we see the erosion of civil liberties, even if it's that erosion isn't being exploited as much as it could be, we need to think about, these Democrats need to think about the fact that a Republican can come into office, someone who's far more authoritarian, someone like Donald Trump can come into office. But I also want to just raise the issue of Congress also giving up its own power in order to embolden and empower the executive branch, because we already know what Bill Barr's ideology is. We already know that he doesn't believe in a system of checks and balances. He doesn't believe in how our system of government is set up in the first place. And so when you hear stories about Nancy Pelosi striking a deal with Steve Mnuchin over trillions of dollars in stimulus money, you have to consider the fact that that legislation is written in a way that essentially allows Steve Mnuchin to use that money with absolutely no oversight, with absolutely no transparency, and it gives the executive branch power, unchecked power, right? So we need to hold Democratic members of Congress accountable as well when they just willy-nilly hand over power to the executive branch and go against our entire system of government, which is supposed to have checks and balances.
Absolutely.